Welcome back to the studio. I always end the videos, usually, especially the quilting ones, by saying that all I need to do now is get the quilt with a binding and a sleeve on it. And it occurs to me that showing you how I put a sleeve on is something I've never done. And I didn't originate this particular process, but a friend of mine did way back when I was working in Miami. The person I learned from is Jane Hardy Miller, aka Rusty Miller. She was the one who did all of the French braid books, and I'm not sure if she originated this technique or if it's something that she just learned from others along the way, but it's just a really great way to do the sleeve, and it's just the way that I've always done it since I've learned it from her. And I hope I don't mess it up, because sometimes you learn something and you might have tweaked it a little bit along the way and you don't even realize you've changed it. But I'm going to show you how I do it currently, and I hope I don't mess up her technique. I'm going to be showing you two different ones. I was going to show you on my growth chart first, and I will admit I was going to be cheating because it is the very shortest width, and that would make it the very shortest process to do. Now the process is going to be the same regardless of the length of the width of the quilt, but it would be easier for me to get it done. The problem with that one is that the backing and the binding and the sleeve are all exactly the same material, and I thought that it might be a little bit hard for that to show up in the camera. So for that reason, I'm going to do two. So instead of getting away with doing it easier, I'm making it twice as hard. But I am going to do two, and that way I'm sure that one way or another I'll get my point across. The first thing that I will tell you is that the length of the strip that I always cut is 9 inches. And that way when it's folded in half and there's a double seam allowance at the top, we still end up with a sleeve that's plenty wide enough for any type of pole or rod to go through. And I will show you up close in a second, but I'm going to show you also, I always, except today, will lay my strip across the top of the quilt, and I do it at the top of the quilt where the sleeve is going to be, just in case there's any variance from the top and the bottom. And I will lay the ruler right over the edge of the quilt, and I will cut it exactly the same width as the quilt top. Now in this particular case, I added 1/4 of an inch on each side. On the orange, I did it exactly, and I'll show you that up close as we get to it. But I'm going to bring the camera in closer so we could see a little bit closer. The first thing that we're going to do is just iron over the edges so we could get a folded edge and sew those on. And we'll do that on both the aqua and the orange. And then we're going to go ahead and attach these to the back side of each of these two quilted pieces. You should just be able to see that this aqua piece is 1/4 of an inch wider on each side than the actual top, and you'll understand that as I proceed. What I'm going to do with the iron is I like to just fold over the edge just a little bit and give that a little bit of a press. There are tools to help you fold this on an exact lines. I've seen them used for hemming pants, the little metal thing that helps you get an exact crease, but I don't worry about an exact crease too much with this because it's not going to show. So I've folded that over twice and I've ironed it. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm trying to just get a little tiny bite, a little tiny fold as neat as possible. And I just want to do this so that that edge of the sleeve, the opening, is not a raw edge. It just looks a little more finished. And that's why I wanted it to be a little bit extra. And you can see when I get this finished that that's going to come just inside where the binding is. I've got spray paint on my hands. So I'm going to go ahead and top stitch right on the very edge of this when I get over to the machine. Now I'm going to show you on the orange one the same process. On this one I cut this strip. It's still 9 inches, but I cut the strip exactly the same width as the quilt. But I'm going to go through the same process and give a double fold and a press on each side, just so I have a nice folded edge and it doesn't snag the pole or the rod when we're putting that through, when we're hanging up the rod. And after I get this folded and pressed, I can just take this over to the machine and give it a quick top stitch. And you can see when this one's finished, it's going to come inside a little bit more. It's still going to be plenty long enough to give support to the entire length of the top. One thing that I will say, I know talking to Rusty, that she has said now that she does, if she has a really long quilt that she's going to hang, one that would require a center support for the rod, she will separate the sleeve into 2 components, and she'll add it so that there's a space open in the middle for that rod support to connect. So she would add it in 2 separate pieces. So that's just something to keep in mind. But right now I'm going to go to the machine and just top stitch the 2 edges on the orange and the 2 edges on that aqua color. I've learned a lot since we've been doing these videos as often as we have. In the beginning, I didn't even want to be in the videos, but I've learned a lot about editing the videos, and I've tried to learn a lot about lighting. One of the things that I just noticed when I tried to zoom in, because today is such a gloomy day, the closer I zoomed in, the darker the pickup on the camera was. So I'm a little bit of a wide angle just so that the pickup is a little bit brighter. But I'm just going to top stitch right on the very edge of the fold here so that the fold stays very flat, and I'm top stitching on the what would be the inside of the sleeve, so I make sure that that doesn't get caught when the pole goes through it. And I'm just using cotton thread. The thread that I'm using is Isocord. No, it's not Isocord. This is Aurifil, just regular Aurifil cotton. And I'm sewing on my Bernina B35. So that is the one for the growth chart, and now I'll do the one for Love is Love. what I've gotten used to doing with anything that is a wall hanging, I put a sleeve on it. The sleeve does not hinder me from hanging these quilts in any different way. So if I'm just going to be using some of the clips, the Command Performance clips that I have on the wall in other places, I can still go ahead and use those even though it has a sleeve on it. But then if I also want to use the rods, the sleeve is already on there. And I just like to know that they're done. I'd rather go through the work now rather than have to go back and redo something later. I'm sure you've heard me say before that I'm already trying to catch up with my past, and by that I just mean trying to get caught up with projects with quilt tops that I've done years ago. And even in these cases, I've just recently finished 8 or 10 smaller quilt tops, and I've taken them to my friend who, very luckily for me, does the hand whipping of the binding and the sleeve. And by the time I get these finished and take to her, she will have 10. And those are just the ones I've finished in the last few weeks. And when I get them all back, I'm really planning on resetting the whole studio because it's been a while, and I also am setting up a new camera system. It's both a security system, but also I could use the cameras for some little clips to show you a bigger overall view of the studio, front and back. And so it needs to be straightened up a little bit better than what it is right now. Sometimes when you only shoot from one side, you only clean the side that it is exposed. But for the new camera system, it will have to be clean all the way around, which is not really my nature. So you can see this is where the fold is. This is would be the inside of the sleeve. And this is the front side of the finished quilt, and this is the top. So I'm going to flip this over, and I'm not going to press a fold in this at all because I don't want a fold in it. But I am going to bring the two raw edges together. I'm going to grab my scissors real quick and a couple pins. I want to bring all of the raw edges together and put maybe 5 pins in here, and I'm going to trim that off. I fell in love with all of these wool dryer balls. I keep about 5 of them in my dryer. They help fluff up the clothes in the dryer, helps them dry faster. I also have the big wool mats underneath the covering on my ironing board here and upstairs, and I've got smaller ones that I use for portable ironing mats. I really like those. Some people say they stink, but I've never ever had that issue. But I also sometimes, often use like that lavender spray, so that's all I smell. So all I'm doing here, you can get real finicky if you want, but I'm just going to eyeball it. I want the center of this to be the center here, and I'm going to put the raw edge of this against the raw edge of the finished quilt. And once I get that, I'm going to transfer the pins from just being through the sleeve to also being through the quilt also. so those are pinned and all of the raw edges are together. You have the two raw edges of the sleeve and the raw edge of the quilt top. And when I sew this, I'm going to sew it with a really scant 1/4 of an inch. I mean, maybe even just 1/8 of an inch. I really just want to catch both edges and the quilt top, the smallest seam possible through here. So I can put that over here. I can get the other one ready while we're at it. I'm going to start this way just so we make sure that I am at the top. This is the top of the quilt. I'll flip this over. Oh, look how beautiful that. This is a whole lot of love quilting pattern. I really do love that. I have the raw edge here. Well, it's not a raw edge, the folded seam there. So I'm going to bring that together again. It's a really gray day here today. It was a gray day here another day this week. In fact, that reminds me I have to go move. I had planted 2 peonies that I bought tubulars of, and the pot was overflowing with water. It's not, apparently the pot didn't have drainage. So if I don't move that, they're going to drown. Now this one, remember, was a little bit wider, 1/4 inch on each side, so it's going to be a little bit closer to the edge, so I'll have to pay attention to that. And because I'm not going to use a walking foot, it will migrate this way a little bit, so I'm going to start a little bit closer to this edge because I know it will grow that way. Again, I'm going to go really tight seam allowance. And we're going to go back over to the machine and sew. I just did such a great job explaining the process of putting my binding on. Oh man, I was so eloquent, but I didn't have the recording button set. Anyway, good thing I was doing 2. I always start on the right side 2/3 of the way down when I'm doing my binding. I don't know why, but it's just the way that I keep track of how much more I have to go. So also, I don't generally use a walking foot anymore. It's so bulky, and I don't generally tend to get that much better results by using it. So I don't go to the extra effort. I like to leave about 8 or 10 inches of a tail so I can do my joining, and I probably won't show you that because I don't do anything incredibly special. I just overlap it and trim it about 1/2 of an inch overlap. That 1/2 of an inch is the 1/4 inch seam allowance for each piece. Join it and sew it. I don't have any of those, I haven't learned any of those handy tricks that the new gals are doing. Kind of like, you know, we get stuck in a hairstyle. I've just gotten stuck with that old binding join, and I'm pretty happy with it. I like to keep the binding pretty taut as I'm joining it to the quilt. Make sure I have it right to the edge. And I love this measuring gauge. I'm not sure what all it's good for, but it's got all different measurements: 3/4, 1/3, 1 1/4, half. But I exclusively use the 1/4 inch one. And I use it to mark 1/4 inch away from the edge of the corner, and that's where I stop stitching the straight line and then angle out towards the corner, and that's what helps me get that nice fold of the binding. I don't know if it's going to show up at all, but the binding that I chose was the same colors that are in the quilt, but it also has hearts in it. And by the time the binding gets all folded out, I don't know if any of them will actually show up because of the size. But it was the final selling point on this particular fabric. I had looked at 8 or 10 different ones, trying to decide which one was going to make it. And because this is love, and I used a whole lot of love for the quilting, the hearts won out. I do like the way that this binding is going to frame in this lighter border. The lighter border is unusual for me. I usually like a darker border, but I liked how it had the rainbow effect of pulling in all the colors that were in the stack of birds. The little family gathering of birds, whatever kind of family unit they are. Some families we're born into, and some families we choose. I guess I talked about it in the segment that didn't get recorded, but I'm getting ready to go down to Florida, and I haven't been to Florida in close to 15 years. We have to close down my mother's house and empty it and get it on the market. So I would appreciate any well wishes, any good thoughts. Because I'm taking her with me. And you know what it's like to have somebody let go of their stuff and pick and choose what they want to take. It's not going to be an easy one. I've been putting it off for 1.5 years. I have my binding attached to the front of both of the small quilts, and I have my sleeve attached to the back. So I'm going to stop for today, and I'm going to do some hand sewing tonight. What I'm going to do tonight is do my whip stitching of the binding. So we'll have the binding sewn down around, and I'm going to pull it to the back and just do my whip stitching. And probably because I haven't been doing much of this, I'm just going to be doing the top portion of the two pieces, because that's all I need to do the illustration. So I'll pick this back up tomorrow when I have both of these done, hopefully. Oh, I'm in love with that. Isn't that beautiful? And we'll go ahead and finish the sleeve off for both of these, and then I'll let my friend go ahead and finish the rest of the binding off, because I'm a cheat. Where was I? Where was I? Oh, yes. Well, I did get my two pieces that I wanted to get sewn done last night, so I can bring you in and show you that. I probably could have done a little bit more than what I did, but I got enough done to show you. So I can move the camera in and show you what I did. So I pulled the binding around to the back the way that one normally would, and I whip stitched it down. And in the case of this sleeve here, it was almost a little too close to where the binding was going to go, so I just pulled it out of the way and pinned it. Once I get the binding down, then I can go ahead and put it back in place, and then it's not going to bother anything. So I can put that pin out of the way. But you can see I'm still sewing here, but what I'm doing, I'm just pulling the binding from the front to the back. This is the folded edge. And all I really want to do is make sure that the folded edge is covering my stitch line. So that's what we're doing all the way around. And I've mitered the edges there. And again, on this side, where this is a little too close, all I have to do is pull this out of the way while I'm stitching. And then once I'm finished, I can go ahead and release that and put it back down. So the next step, you can see I had to do the same thing over here. If you remember, when I made the sleeve, I didn't press the sleeve in half, and I didn't really fold it in half. I didn't really want a crease in it either. I have a little bit of a crease there. But what we're going to do, whatever the height of the binding is, we're going to lift up the top layer of the sleeve, and we're going to bring that up to meet the top edge of the binding, and whatever that is. And I have a little bit wider binding than I normally do. Usually it's only about 3/8 of an inch. But we're just going to go ahead and clip that in place with some of those little clips. You could also use pins if you wanted. But then we're going to go ahead and fold this down. You could even go as far as ironing it if you wanted to. Now you want to get a good crease in it, because what we're going to do is we're going to hand sew along here. This is the back part of the edge of the sleeve, so that nothing gets caught there. And then when we get to the very edge, we'll whip around to the outside edge, and we're going to whip down this edge and then come back up the other edge. Then when we release the pins, we're going to have some give there that's going to allow the pole or rod or whatever tool we're using to be able to come up. But because we have brought it up to the edge of the top of the binding, it won't show because that's as high as it can go. So regardless of what type of implement you use to hang, it can't go any higher than that. I'll show you again on here in case it's any easier to see. But I'm just going to stick my fingers on the inside of the sleeve, and I'm only rolling up the top edge of that sleeve to match the top of the quilt. And then I can use clips or whatever else I have on hand, and then sew down across there. Once I whip stitch this down, and I want to be careful to do a blind stitch that doesn't go all the way through to the front. Once I do that, then I can go ahead and release these pins and my sleeve is finished. In this particular case, I am going to iron this just to give myself a really good crease, just in case while I'm handling it. It gives me a line to make sure that when I'm whip stitching it, I know I'm whip stitching in the exact right place, because sometimes I've had the edge migrate a little bit, and that crease just gives you a really good identification of where you're sewing. So now that it's pressed, it's not going to matter once I release it. And these are the little clips I was talking about. They just help hold it in place, and I didn't bring any onto the table. So I'll put those on there while I'm whip stitching. One of the things I always liked about applique is just how few things you need to actually do it. I have always liked these Clover needle threaders. They have the little dot and the big dot for doing the smaller eye needle and the larger eye needle. And there's all different kinds of needles. People tried to get me to use milliner's needles at first, the really long ones. But I was tearing up my thumb. I was just shredding it when I was sewing. And the other thing is I was taking huge grasshopper stitches because the needle was so big. So I found if I used the smallest needle they made, I could not take big stitches because my hand took up most of the needle and there was nothing left but a little tiny bit, and that's all the bigger stitch I could make. So because I was lazy, I made myself work by not giving myself enough to work with. I also have just always used Wile silk thread. I know it's a little bit harder to find right now, but I have this where I do my hand sewing on wall racks, and I have it in just about every color. In fact, I think I have about 2 spools of every color in case they stop making it. And I've only ever used one whole spool in the 30 years that I've been sewing, and that was because one day I was vacuuming and the thread got caught in the vacuum cleaner, and it got caught in the belt, and it sucked it all up in the belt. So I've never actually used one whole roll in all the years that I've been doing applique. I always make a knot right here at the back of the needle so my needle doesn't come unthreaded, and then when I'm done sewing, I just cut it off, and then I will tie a knot in the end by making an X with the needle and the thread. Little X. I'm going to wrap the thread around the needle a couple times and pinch it, push the needle through, pull the thread with that wrap around it until it gets all the way to the end, and there's my little tiny knot. And if there's too much tail hanging off after it, I can just trim it off. Now I'm going to start up here, and I want to hide my tail, so I'll just lift everything up and start from underneath. And I'm going to pull the top part of the sleeve out of the way, and I'm just going to merrily go my way and start doing my whip stitching. Notice I did choose an orange thread as close as I could get to the fabric color that I'm using. And I am a little bit out of practice with hand applique. Since my mom moved in, I haven't been doing any handwork. I've been taking care of her, and I just haven't had quite as much time in the evening after the day is done. We have a lot of things we had to take care of, and we're still not quite settled yet. Once I get past the back side of the sleeve opening, then I'll move to the fold itself, and I'm going to whip stitch that down. I don't know what part of the country you're all in, or world, but I'm really every day just counting my blessings and thanking God, because I'm not a heat person. I do not like the heat of summer. And today, for instance, we're in June right now, middle of June, and today it's in the 60s. And last night it was in the 50s, and I couldn't be happier. Okay, I've gotten all of the back sewn down, so nothing's going to get caught behind that. It's not going to snag the pole or the rod that you put through there. And because that's the very edge, if I want to, I can even go ahead and get that almost all the way through, and then run my needle through the opening and actually tie a knot. Make sure that doesn't come out. And then this is a little bit trickier to get the grip of it, but I'm just going to start whip stitching this fold all the way across. And I'll just continue this process until I get all the way across here and back up to the top. So I'm going to do a little bit of that off camera, and I'll show you when I get a little bit more of it done. So that's it. I've sewn down the edges and across the bottom, and now I can release the pins from the top, or the clip, and now there's room for the pole to go in without making the front of the quilt bulge. The sleeve can't go above the top of the quilt and show from the front, because we made sure that it wouldn't go above the front edge, and it isn't bulky enough to interfere with any other method of hanging. So if you want to use clips, it's still going to be fine. If you want to pin it to a board or something, you can still pin through it. But if you want to use any type of hanger, you can go ahead and do that, because the sleeve's already on it. So that's it. That's how I do a sleeve. That's how I learned from my friend Rusty down in Miami years ago. I don't know if I've tweaked it at all since she taught me, but that's how I learned. Anything that I think might be a wall hanging, I've always done that, just in case. Even if it ends up on the bed sometimes, it doesn't interfere with the quilt on the bed. But any quilt that's in the studio that I've made has this type of sleeve on it. I've never put the separation in the middle the way that she does for the larger ones. It's probably a really good idea because I have had in my living room one that has a support that does have a little funny bump in it, so I should really consider that. But it's just something I wanted to show you for a while, and sometimes I get so many things caught up in my head that I can't work them all through when I want to. But I'm glad I finally got to show you. I hope some of you find it useful, and if you do, please leave a comment. And I thank you for all the comments, because it really is the only way I have of knowing what you are thinking. Since I don't get to see you in person, we don't get to see you at the shows like we used to. So I don't get the feedback directly unless you comment. So that's why I appreciate it personally. So thank you for that. Sharing, liking, subscribing, following, whatever those things, all those things are. So thanks for joining us today here in the studio, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. No telling what we might get up to. Until then, take care of yourself first and foremost, and take care of each other. If I had a rod, I'd put it in there, but I don't have a rod handy. Okay, real quick, I found a rod. Just to show you. Did that make it better? Oh.